got to officially kind of say now, former MP Gareth Hughes, and that's former as of a week and a bit ago.
Yeah, on 7 p.m. on election night. So I had to change all my Facebook and Twitter handles, and
that's where I noticed that. I noticed your name ticking over.
I think I was one of the first politicians to be on Twitter in New Zealand. So I grabbed Gareth MP, never thinking that I should actually think of a more enduring handle. So I've had to change it to Gareth Hughes NZ.
So, but is that easy to do? Because that means you're now. I remember when Lord went massive. It was all exciting because she went from Lord music to just Lord, and is it hard to change the MP thing just to your normal name and stay?
No, it was pretty easy. I was actually doing it just before I was hopping on a plane, but then I got a message from someone saying, "Hey, someone else is going to grab Gareth MP since you've scrapped it." So I quickly had to make a new account to keep that one. So luckily, I just timed it right before the door closed on the plane.
So why are we keeping Gareth MP?
Oh, so there's no parody accounts.
So it's not like one day we might be back.
Oh, you never know.
So, I mean, your story has... actually, I want to know this, because you're someone who's chosen to leave. When does your pay stop for being an MP?
Yeah, so everyone who left on purpose like me or lost their seat, they actually get paid for 3 months after election day, which is nice.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny though, there's this pervasive myth that because I did more than 3 terms, that I get like this pension for life.
No, and I've always, if people who were in, I think, before 92, that applies to them, but after that it doesn't.
So all I do get is I'm allowed to park my car at Parliament.
Oh.
I get a visitor's pass, and I get 2 books from the Parliamentary Library.
2 books?
I'm allowed to take out 2 books.
So that's like...
So that's the great perk that former politicians get.
Now. So, but people who have been there for a million years, I mean, we think about the Winstons and those kinds of guys, I think it is 90...
I thought it was 96, but I might be wrong.
It might be 96, because that was obviously the MMP change.
Yeah, so maybe the Winstons, the Nick Smiths, I think they do get the subsidy, yeah.
Yeah, which would be nice. And I mean, on some level, if you're serving... I guess, you look at people like, John Key and Helen Clark, and probably just once she gets there, they're certainly not wanting for money afterwards. But I have heard those stories about MPs who leave not willingly, like they've been voted out, and they're sort of... I have heard of a story of he's driving a taxi the following Monday sort of thing. So I wonder if... I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing on your CV at the end of the day, because if you're an MP for this group... Perhaps that means you've eliminated yourself from half of New Zealand who then won't want to employ you because they don't want to be associated with that part of politics. I don't know. I mean, so the old pensions used to be because they did a bit of a shifty trick back in the day. Instead of paying MPs more because it was unpopular, they added all these perks on the side, like the pension for life sort of thing. So look, I just think you should be transparent and pay them what they're worth, with an independent method, and you shouldn't add all the perks on. I mean, when I first entered Parliament, I was told, "Hey, Gareth, you can fly anywhere in the country you want at any time for any purpose," and I said, "That's ridiculous." I mean, I could just go to the Bay of Islands for a holiday and get free airfares. So when I entered Parliament, I voluntarily renounced that because I think that's ridiculous. And again, this is one of those historical perks they added on to MPs because they didn't want to pay them a higher rate. So, yeah. Does that one continue on after retirement, that you can keep using in New Zealand? Because that used to be part of the deal, didn't it?
I think it's true. It used to be part of the deal. And I think like Jeanette Fitzsimons was able to use it. But it was quite perverse because she couldn't use it for her campaigning work, but she could use it to visit family.
Yeah.
And I think former prime ministers get it too.
I guess there's a different sort of level when you go to PMs and that, though.
Yeah.
Maybe once you've got that right honourable, there's a few other things.
But I still haven't got my 2 books out from the library, but I'll do that next time in Wellington.
So everyone who has lost their seats gets paid till, let's say, Christmas, January, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or who has resigned their seat.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay,
yeah. If you resigned before election day, though, you get nothing. So.
Right.
Yeah.
But for yourself, who resigned on election night, that's kind of the same pay as someone who loses their seat.
Yeah. Which is nice because
Yeah.
we've now moved to this island and we're on 20 hours a week on a pretty low salary, so it's a big pay drop. But look, I never went into Parliament for the pay. I mean, I'd worked for Greenpeace for 10 years before, which
you get paid in seal blubber or something, don't you?
And love.
We can't not just touch quickly. I want to talk about what you're up to now, right? But we can't not just touch quickly on election night. Give us your thoughts.
Amazing. I mean, I'll put it this way. I bought a house the week before election night 2011 because I was so confident I was going to be back. If I was standing this election, I probably wouldn't have done it. As a Green, it was touch and go whether we'd get back. History said that no government support party had ever crossed 5% after being in government. The average vote decline was 24%. So the chances of the Greens getting back, we needed to rewrite the history book. So I was confident we were going to do it, but I thought it was going to be close. But I was blown away how high it actually was. And then, Labour has made MMP history as well. So it was just a night of going, whoa, whoa. And then Chloe won. It was like, whoa.
Yeah, that was amazing. That might have been the biggest, not surprise, upset because she's deserving of the win, but that probably should have almost been the biggest headline. Obviously, Labour getting a majority became the biggest headline, but maybe Chloe winning should have been, because it was, in any other year it would have been, put it that way.
Yeah, and ahead of the Greens got 4.9%, like Jeanette Fitzsimons did back in '99. It would have had an influence on the shape of the government.
Yeah.
So incredible. But I wasn't that surprised, because I've spent a lot of work across my career trying to organise people and mobilise campaigns and kind of push stuff. Hers was just this authentic grassroots movement that just grew and grew, and it was staggering the crowd she was drawing and the hundreds or thousands of volunteers she got. So while all the pundits were wrong, I wasn't surprised, because she's a genuine something new, a genuine political star.
Do you still feel, have you got distance enough? I don't mean distance enough as in it's been long enough ago, because it was yesterday basically, but do you feel that you've got distance enough, because obviously you knew you were retiring from politics now, to look at it more as an independent, or can you not get past look at it from a Green Party member and that's all it is? Because I'd be interested to hear your thoughts as well about the conversations going on at the moment. What do you think the Greens should do? I guess what I'm asking is are you at a place now where you can offer an opinion that hasn't got a Green bias to it, is what I'm kind of asking.
Yeah, and I think if I'm honest, I'm still too close to it. I had this sort of long farewell over the course of a year, probably, from the announcement through to all the farewells and valedictory. And I'm really interested to know what's going on. And, I'm still a Green member. I still want to stay involved. So I think I'm still pretty close, actually. And I still get my parliamentary emails. So I'm still not out the door 100% yet.
Do you think the Greens should go into some kind of formal arrangement with Labour?
This isn't, groundbreaking or a hot take, but it depends, right? If Labour gives us a genuine deal with some autonomy, some power...
But that's not realistic. Because no matter what they give the Greens, they're not needed. Greens aren't needed to pass any legislation. So even if there's an apparent look of power or autonomy, I'm not saying this to belittle the Greens, but they don't have any.
Oh, no, absolutely. And they've got no leverage at all.
Yeah.
But what Labour wants is the Green brand.
Yep.
They want the Green support. They want to shore up their left flank, so we're not, criticising them from a left-wing perspective. So the Green Party aren't powerless. They've got tangible things to offer, and that's why, they are taking it seriously, but it shouldn't be a gift given lightly. 2 decades of mana and values and policies have been developed. It could be thrown away if they do a bad deal. So it all depends what Labour's offering. And if the Green Party is just to be spokesperson for the Labour cabinet with no ability to actually shape the policies, if they're just fronting Labour Party decisions, I can't see what's in it. A few smaller mid-level decisions as a minister, if you can't actually shape the policy, I don't know why you'd give up your independence, risk your mana. We've seen the pitfalls of other parties. And I appreciate what other people say, which is, it's such a dire time for the environment, for the climate, for our society. So we need to crack on and do as much as we can. Mm-hmm. But if Labour isn't going to fundamentally address those questions, if they're going to continue tinkering on the margins, I think the Green Party in that scenario is probably better to be out on the streets growing a movement for the transformational change. We shouldn't be complicit in the tinkering, which is actually making the problems worse.
I don't think the Greens should go in, actually. I said before the election, what'll happen is Labour will go, "Hi Greens, do you want to come join on board?" Like John Key did with the Maori Party back in the day, and primarily the reason they'll do it is for next election. Because I think it's probably fair to say, whilst nobody can predict the future, it's highly unlikely that Labour will get a majority next time around. They'll need partners. That's a part of that sort of politicking of politics. But actually, I think because basically the Greens will have no power. It doesn't mean they won't have influence, but will have no power. I can't see any reason to be in there, because even if they were in an oppositional position officially, Marama can knock on Jacinda's door and go, we want to try and do this. What do you think? There's nothing stopping that. You don't have to be in supplying confidence or some version of it with that. So I think it would be best for the Greens not to be hamstrung, because if you heard Jacinda on the night, which I'm sure you did, or at least in repeats if you didn't see it live, it was a very moderate conversation that she put out there. And I think that was the right thing to do on the night, because she's got to tell all those people who didn't vote for her, don't panic. However, they've got 3 years. Labor's got 3 years to basically do what they want. And I was talking to someone the other day. I was talking to a mate, and we were talking about interest-free student loans. I'm a person who benefited from interest-free student loans. I'm a person who benefited from working for families, still do, thanks to Auntie Helen and that iteration of Labor government. I never respected John Key when he came into government and went, we're going to leave that. Because although I was a beneficiary of it, as many people were, it's not a national policy. You know what I mean? It's like national policy is not interest-free student loans and working for families. National policy is I would have respected them more to be more honest. To say, if you're going to vote for us, we're going to go down this path. This is our national path. I think for Labor, I will respect them more if they actually go for some of those things that they've always said they would if they could, rather than, as you say, tinkering around the edges, looking to be more moderate to potentially think about, we want to keep this together for 6 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd rather they just got into it.
And I think that's the question for the Prime Minister is, does she want her picture, kind of like Savage's was in the 1930s, as this transformational figure in New Zealand politics that generations look back to and say, this was a clear turning point? It looks like the signals aren't that direction. It looks like, you could call it the fifth term of the Helen Clark government. That it's trying to govern from the centre, not rock the boat. Pundits talk about using up political capital and trying to keep it. But the fact is that they didn't really run on a policy platform for the election. So it was a
COVID election.
That's right, but they didn't introduce any policies, so they're going to spend the next 3 years saying we didn't have a mandate for X, Y, and Z transformational policy, therefore we're not going to do it. So, the risk for the Greens, though, the other thing is they end up greenwashing Labor. Yeah, well, that's the thing. Labor will. I can see Labor wanting to have the Greens on because if they want to push through some of those policies, they can give it to the Greens, and much like the smacking bill, they can say, well, that was Sue. That wasn't us, that was Sue. So you can blame them for that bill. Yes, we supported it, but so did lots of national MPs. So, we in this COVID climate need tax, for example, in this country. So I would expect them to see, various forms of things they've always talked about, like, the words just jumped out of my head, tax on selling your second house, capital gains. Capital gains tax is a given for this government. If they don't do that, then it's like, well, this is not a Labor Party that's been kind of doing this for the last 4 or 5 years, 10 years, whatever. I think that's a given. I also think the cannabis referendum looks like polls are saying it may not get through, but in the third year, they could just pass it because they have a majority if they wanted to. Yep. Those kinds of things I think are, when I say a must, if this Labor government was a true Labor Party, those things would be coming in. Yeah, and the Prime Minister's ruled out a capital gains tax, and they've ruled out any fundamental tax changes this entire term. So that's disappointing, and it's not my place to judge them. But
you can comment on it.
Oh, yeah.
Especially now.
Yeah. It's not my... Well, I guess what I'm saying is it's not my job to say whether they're a true Labor Party or not. I didn't join the Labor Party because I think it's an outdated ideology that's not fit for the times. It's this old 19th, 20th century battle of ideologies. We needed something new and modern. And, you and my first year at university, I was still paying interest on my student loan.
Yep.
Our generation have only known this neoliberal experiment from the 1980s, and still doesn't look like we're going to be changing in the next 3 years.
So why not? Why don't we see a massive green growth then? Because, the Greens always seem to come in, between, 5.5 and 7.5? Would that be fair? There may have been a couple that were a bit better than that, but there doesn't seem to be green growth when it comes to the supporter base. So what I'm seeing, or what I guess we can infer with that, maybe correctly or incorrectly, is that there is a very small group of New Zealanders who are sticking with that brand. I almost kind of want to say forget this election for ACT, because I think that was a revolt away from National, but it's the same for ACT. And it does seem that let's just use round figures. There's 10% Green support on one side, there's 5% ACT or far right support on the others. Well, let's say 10 and 10, because if you include the Tops and the Conservatives and that kind of stuff, and then there is really 80% in the middle that are National, of which probably that middle 20 or 30% can go, others moderate can go either way, sort of things. Why don't, with this failed experiment, why don't we see a massive growth in the Green Party, do you think?
Well, I mean, there are two things. We have seen growth in the Green Party. I mean, Peter Dunn used to joke at us and say they were one bad election from oblivion. We actually survived a terrible election last time, which, I still have a bit of trauma from. We survived being in government and actually have grown. Two of my terms, I think we got 11%. Around the world, I think the Greens are now quarter of the ACT Parliament. We're they're the largest parties in European, German states. So around the world, the Green Project is growing, and I think we're actually stronger in New Zealand. But the second thing is we've got this whole institution of society working against transformational change. The way the mainstream media adopts it, the way advertising, all the signals society gives focuses on this status quo ideology, which is neoliberalism, which is just basically the way we run society under the present rules. So it is difficult, and that's why I may be erring more on the side of staying out of government, particularly if it's a bad deal with no influence or power from Labour, because change actually happens from the bottom up. And people like Savage and Fraser from the first Labour government, they actually went to jail for their beliefs. They actually spent decades building up this movement, and it's something I've spent 2 decades working on. A lot of other people around the country are working on it. Change takes time, and actually it doesn't happen at the political level. That's where the laws are signed and the votes are passed. That's the end of the process. Maybe we're at the end of the beginning, but we're still at the beginning.
Do you think, I was just going to have a look, I think probably as per a Green philosophy, you're looking at it from a global perspective. I don't want to say it's disingenuous, but it doesn't, even if it was 10 or 11%, it really does seem like this transformative thing we're looking for. I guess I think about business, talk about neoliberalism, it's probably not a good example to use business, but you want to see steady growth. You don't want to kind of see good year, bad year, good year, bad year, good year. And that's, I guess, what I'm saying when I'm saying it's probably, if you put a line right through it, it might be at 7% sort of thing. That's what I'm just wondering. Because, I remember way back when, I think maybe it was 96, thinking a vote for the Greens is a great idea, because even if you don't agree with them, a new perspective in Parliament was really important. And I quite like now that we've sort of gotten rid of New Zealand First. Not that I personally had anything against Winston Peters, he's always a great interview. But we've now got, from New Zealand standards, a sort of left/far left. The Greens aren't far left, but a left, centre right, far right sort of group. And I think that's quite nice, because that is fairly representative, and you don't have someone in the middle who can play both sides, who would play both sides, kind of being the handbrake sort of thing. So I quite like that. And
a Maori perspective as well now. It's great to see the Maori Party back. And
do you think that'll mean anything in this Parliament, though?
Policy-wise, probably not, because Labour wants to keep a lock on the Māori electorates, and all the signals have been, friendly hostile, maybe is the way to describe it, saying we'll work with them, but we won't listen to them, effectively is the subtext I'm hearing.
Have we also finalised, if we finalised that seat? Because there was about 400 ahead on election night.
No, we'll have to wait for the special.
Right,
but gosh, I hope, I think it's so critical for our country going forward. There is a clear, distinct Māori voice in Parliament. I naively opened a bottle of bubbly on election night 2005 at the Greenpeace Action Warehouse, thinking it was going to be a Green, Labour, Māori government, which would have been so progressive policy-wise. But instead, Labour went with New Zealand First United Future, which was a much more conservative government. So I'm sceptical and cynical of Labour. I spent my first 10 years as an activist actually campaigning against the terrible environmental policies of that former government. So, look, I'm always... take Labour with a grain of salt. They're the closest party to work with, but I think the Greens need to really protect their independence. We're not there to support Labour. We're not there to shore up Labour's flank. We're not the environmental wing of Labour. We're our own independent party, because we're a distinct modern ideology. And I think the Greens should be ramping up that rhetoric actually and growing that movement, because that's how we're ultimately going to see the change that Green policy wants to achieve.
it does feel like you've got a little bit more freedom to speak a bit more clearly. I'm not saying you're not saying things that Marama didn't say sitting in that seat, but you feel like you've got a little bit more freedom to be a bit blunter. Do you think so at the moment?
Maybe. I mean, I was pretty blunt when I announced that I was retiring and saying the government wasn't transformational. And, you know, I think a lot of people didn't want to hear that because the government was very good at its public relations, and it was trying to make this message that things were fundamentally changing when in fact they weren't. So, you know, I've had that courage to call it out, and, you know, internally I've called for a much more a strident, assertive Green Party, and, you know, that's what I want to see because, you know, we've only got a matter of years before we could see locking in the collapse of our ecosystem. So we really need to ramp it up. And Labour, again, to go back to history, you know, they weren't pussyfooting around in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
They were growing a movement because things were so dire.
I don't want to obviously bring you in to talk about, you know, New Zealand politics the whole time.
Gosh.
Yeah, you've just left, I know. But let's have a look. Let's bring this up for people to have a look so they can see with us. This is your new life at the moment. This is your new home. I'm going to, it's just moved away from us, but it's known by locals as Quarantine Island. I'm going to say Kamo Taurua. Is that the Maori name for it?
Yep.
Kamo Taurua. And this is an island in the middle of Otago's harbour, Dunedin's harbour. Otago Harbour? What's the official?
Otago Harbour.
It's Otago Harbour,
Yep.
Which is weird because I guess it is the only harbour in all of Otago, but so fair enough. And you have gone from holding, I guess, politicians to account to keeping an island predator free. So this is a really unique change for someone who was sitting in the houses of power to now. I've been to Quarantine Island once. My kids go over there quite a bit because it's, you know, it's the thing that school trips do a lot of. Tell us what led you to this? What led you to being the modern version of a lighthouse keeper on an island in the middle of a harbour?
Oh, it's just so. I mean, we love it so much. So basically, you know, once I decided I was leaving Parliament, we were thinking, what should we do next? And I've become super passionate about sailing. And my wife and I have been doing all the courses, been trying to crew boats, and we had two great dreams. One was to sail around North America, and the other was to explore our backyard in the South Pacific. So we'd been saving up our money, doing a whole bunch of courses, buying all the wet weather gear, and then COVID hit during the lockdown. And we were like, oh shit, we're not going to be doing that. But from our place in Broad Bay on the Otago Peninsula, we could see Quarantine Island from our bedroom every morning. And during the lockdown, when we saw they were looking for a keeper, they were advertising a job, we thought, well, gosh, this would be perfect. And, you know, we get much of the same lifestyle we were wanting when we were wanting to go sailing, which is good family time. You know, I get to be closer to nature, closer to the water. I'm on the boat, you know, at least twice a day, dropping the kids off and picking them up from school. You know, we're living a more simple life. And unlike a boat, I can't sink it and destroy all our savings at the bottom of the ocean. We've got this unsinkable boat. So, look, it's just amazing. It's, I think, 34 hectares. We've got, you know, a third of it's regenerating bush. We've got sheep we're looking after, a whole bunch of chickens. You know, we've got these heritage buildings from when it was the quarantine station days. It's got this great story of the community coming together, of history. It's just paradise.
Yeah. And tell me about the boat. I'm assuming because you're green and you're ecological. Do you sail backwards and forwards? Is that how you get your kids
well, we
to
do
the
have
other side?
kayak, so we do sometimes kayak, but I'm not going to pretend that I kayak every single day. So we get this little, it's probably from the 60s or 70s, I imagine. It's an open dory, so it's a very small, very old, very heavy wooden boat. It's got a little 5 horsepower engine on the back.
Wow.
So we putt across the harbour to drop the kids off at school in the mornings. So on rough days we can't take the kids to school.
So that happens? That's like
it's happened quite a few times, and, you know, they're wrapped. But
did you think about the homeschooling opportunity? Was that a conversation?
Oh yeah, and particularly my boys off to high school next year, and we thought, well, you know, should we do that or homeschool or send them off to high school? But, you know, the mainland's not too far away, so we also think it's important that they get to hang out with their friends and do that stuff, and, you know, we want a bit of peace as well. So yeah, it works out really well. And the really windy conditions when it's coming from the northeast, our jetty's really exposed, so we get some quite large waves. It's great. We just have a nice family day. Stoke up the fire.
Are you going down to the jetty and throwing a fishing rod in and bringing dinner up? Has that happened yet?
No, and I've been vegetarian for 20 years.
Oh, okay.
But we actually one night were down there having a beer, and we saw all these little rocks around, these shapes around us. They looked exactly like flounder. And my wife's been talking about wanting to eat some fish or try catching fish. So I went and got a floundering spear on Trade Me. When the next, a week later, we're down there, they were rocks.
Oh, really?
We thought we had like millions of flounder around us, but no, they were just rocks.
Flounder's hard as well because they're such a skinny one. To debone them and stuff is a difficult thing to do.
But it was quite weird. I was watching all these YouTube videos about how to do it, and it was quite odd. But it's great just being closer to nature. And we've got a whole school of mullet swimming around our boat this morning. We've got sea lions which come there, all these amazing birds which exist down here. So compared to Wellington, where I'd be stuck inside the air-conditioned complex from 8 in the morning till 10 p.m. at night, I had to get leave to leave the precinct, or my vote wouldn't get counted. So stuck in a suit all day, it's really cathartic, and it's kind of like this weight's off my shoulders. It's lovely. And
did you say you kind of threw it in there when we were talking about how MPs get paid? Oh, the other thing I was going to ask you about MPs, which we can come back to because I want to interrupt this conversation, is what happens to all those staff members? All those PAs and all that kind of stuff. That must be rough when your MP doesn't get in as well. But we'll come back to that. So you mentioned 20 hours a week. So is that sort of the job description is 20 hours a week of work?
Yep.
I'm sure though, but if you're the keeper of the island, it must almost be a 24/7 job, mustn't it? I mean, it doesn't mean you're working 24/7, but if something goes wrong at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, it's not like I'll be around to check it at 9 on Monday morning. Thanks, love.
Yeah, and people are coming and going, and so weekends are really our busy time. We've got lots of visitors and guests, but we get to relax a bit during the week. I mean, just a couple of days ago, we had a guy scramble up the bank behind our house. A big squall had come through, and he felt a bit nervous kayaking round, so he quickly beached his kayak and scrambled up the hillside, and his kayak was still down by the rocks. So I had to go help him, tie some ropes, haul his kayak up the hill. But that's fun stuff too.
I was thinking about the little old boat. You're just talking about rescuing stuff. It seems to be the kind of thing that, with a bit of funding, a decent boat to be a kind of on-call person for that would be a good thing though as well.
Oh, I'd love a big boat. I know the previous keeper, he was Belgian. He wanted a stabby craft, a nice big aluminium boat.
Yep.
Because we're using the boat constantly, so we got different jetties we go to, and we see boats stuck on the sandbank quite often. So the previous keeper, it was the Dougal family. I think they were the keeper family for about 40 or 50 years back when it was a quarantine station.
Wow.
He was a master mariner. I'm just reading his history at the moment, and so he'd often be like the helper who would go out and rescue people.
Yeah, gosh, it's such an interesting life to choose. And I mean, you only just because you literally didn't you go to quarantine island like the week before quarantine started in New Zealand, like the week before lockdown or something?
No, just afterwards. So we moved down from Wellington in February to support family, and we were living on the peninsula.
Right.
So we moved onto the island just after the lockdown.
Right. Okay. So you're brand new. It's a brand new experience.
Oh, it's totally new. And we're coming to grips with the boat, and the boat broke on the second day we were there. We've got composting toilets, so trying to navigate that. The house it's an antique house. Trying to work with sheep, all these different things. So,
who owns the island and who pays you?
Yeah, so the public own it. It's a dock island.
Okay.
Since the 60s, it was a religious community called the St. Martin's community that started work on the island, did a whole bunch of upgrading, worked on the buildings. That sort of morphed into the Kamo Taurua Quarantine Island Community Trust. So it's an independent community trust that basically effectively owns the land under the buildings and the jetty, and they've got a partnership agreement with DOC on how the island's managed. But it's quite an independently run island. So unlike Quail Island in Littleton Harbour near Christchurch, that's just run by DOC. Or say Matu Soames in Wellington, Littleton Harbour. No, Nicholson Harbour, Wellington Harbour. That's just run by DOC. This is one of the only independent community islands out there, which is really special.
It's a fascinating. It's stupid questions I was going to ask. Like, can you see doing it long term? You're only in there 5 minutes.
Yeah,
but it must be great. It is predator free. And what do you do to try and, if it's not, make it predator free or keep it predator free?
I guess the simple answer is mostly. So we don't have any possums. We don't have any stoats. There's we're close enough to the mainland that like rats can swim across.
Can get there, yeah.
So we haven't seen a rat. We've been there. We've got rat traps and possum traps. They're probably there, but we haven't seen them. So we can't really say we're predator free, and it would be pretty hard until the mainland's predator free around us to declare it. But yeah, we've worked with the Halo project. We've got the Halo traps around. Obviously, the other traps as well.
And you haven't found a rat since you've been there? That's a pretty good sign that it's, as you say, mostly predator-free, though, eh?
Yeah, and
bird life there is pretty amazing.
Yeah, so the pretty rare Otago shag, a whole bunch of other beautiful birds.
Nothing like an Otago shag.
Yeah.
Hey, I was also looking at it's kind of you're kind of going full circle a little bit, maybe not. I was looking at your profile, which is still up. If I can find my mouse, there it is. Where's it gone? On your Greens page, I didn't realise you had got a degree in religious studies.
Yeah.
And now you're in a place that has got history of religious groups being at it. What was the degree you did?
Well, so I'm lucky. I botched my university enrolment. I had 17 papers in my first year. And when I got to Wellington, the guy said, well, Gareth, you can't do 17 papers. You've got to cut half of them. So I thought I was doing what my parents wanted me to do, which was doing a whole bunch of commerce papers. And they looked really boring. So I was like, scratch. And then September 11 happened. And, religion wasn't this dying out abstract thing. It was something totally reshaping the world and geopolitics. Totally. And I decided, well, I want to understand this thing that's happening. So that's why I studied religion. So it was, comparative religion. And I mostly focused on evolutionary scientific theories of religion. And then I followed flying saucer cults and wanted to study something distinctly modern. And what I found was that people who believe flying saucers are gods actually have a lot in common with traditional religions. So I'm an atheist, and I just found it a fascinating part of just being a human, this religiosity.
So when 9/11 did happen, obviously religion becomes big in the headlines anymore, and one of the, I guess there's three kind of religions coming from Hebrew, probably more than that, but three main ones being Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Where did you come away from it thinking about the big three? Obviously not from a believer's point of view, because you're not, but what did you find that lit the spark for you to find out? Where did you come to at the end of the course? Like, did you have any epiphanies or conclusions or anything to come with?
Not really, except that I guess my atheism was more locked in.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in the sense that a lot of it's manufactured and, as symbols and ceremonies, which I think serve other functions to, community cohesiveness. And, religion have caused a huge amount of pain and suffering and continue to around the world. So, yeah, it was a fascinating subject to study. And it's, deeply disturbing when you look at what's happening in America and all the problems they've got. I think a lot of it is because of the conservative Christianity,
sure,
and some of their apocalyptic views.
I think it's pretty fair to say that if the character of Jesus was standing in America right now, he would not be going, hey, I'm going to sit alongside he might sit alongside them, but they wouldn't reflect the views of this dude who was supposedly wanting to look after the widows and orphans. I've always said of Christianity, you can't really, from my research, you can't really discount the teachings of the Christ figure. And there seems to be some pretty good teachings there, but it's the implementation, which would be that right-wing conservative in America, that seems to be where the cock-up comes into place.
I mean, Jesus didn't, hand out the bread and loaves and do a work test and a urine test before he handed it out and, say it might risk dependence, I
can see that to be a great meme. That would be just the best meme. There's some of those that come up, they show Jesus asking for a piss test to get your loaves and fishes. That'd be hilarious.
Yeah, and I mean, this is amazing. I mean, I did a lot of study into Judaism, which I think is a fascinating religion. There's amazing things we can take out of from Islam. Sadly, they're often presented in conflict. So, yeah, it's a little bit surprising, and maybe I should have studied something a little bit more practical.
No, I think it's amazing.
But I absolutely loved it.
You must also, though, as someone who's ensconced in politics for so long, and obviously have been, fighting the good fight before you were in the House as well, keep an eye on what's happening in America at the moment. Is there something that interests you that you keep, or are you trying to get away from it altogether? Oh
no, I mean I've done a few study trips to the States, and I've got friends over there, and it's terrible what's happening there. It's really sad. My wife's on a book club with American friends, and she's talking about going to events, hanging out with friends, and what's happening in New Zealand. And the other friends are, we're locked inside our house. I'm too scared to go out. Someone got shot around the corner. It's terrible.
I could never understand. I mean, for a long time, especially the conservative Christian thing. I mean, I think I've always said, if nothing else, you got to look to the Greens and you got to respect them that they always stand by what their beliefs are, and they don't seem to be very changing in that. And I said that to Marama not long ago when I was like, dude, why don't you do a deal with Labour? And she's like, no, the party have decided not to do it, and we're going to stand by that. And I'm like, mate, you might end up regretting that, but you got to appreciate and respect someone for standing by their positions. And even if people hate, the so-called, I looked at something the other day, there are still conservative groups out there fighting the anti-smacking bill. I looked at one the other day, honestly, and they've got a video channel, and there's still like reasons to change the anti-smacking bill still to this day. But anyway, whether people agree or disagree with that, looking back to Sue Bradford's beliefs, you always got to say people like Sue never wavered, and that's great. Whereas most politicians waver like a bit of grass in the wind. And even though you always say that, when you see a group of politicians going from family values, to pussy grabbing, philandering, cheating on his wife while she's pregnant, and going, we're happy with that choice. That's kind of the end of it to me. I'm like, there is a hypocrisy, there is irony, and then there's whatever the fuck this thing is. It's just gone so far the other way. I'm dumbfounded.
Yeah, but they've got this corrupt political duopoly where no other third party can enter. They literally gerrymander the seats to protect their incumbents. Sclerotic gentocracy. I mean, all the leadership are in their 70s or 80s. It's kind of... I was 20 years ago, I was said, America's been through lots of challenges and there are checks and balances that mean no one can take control and it will sort of work out in the end. I'm not so sure about that maybe 20 years on now, because it does look like we're seeing the beginning of the disintegration of it.
Yeah.
And that's scary for global geopolitics. It's scary for friends and, for millions of people over there.
I'm not so sure about the geopolitics side of things because, I think it's pretty clear now that Angela Merkel is the leader of the free world. I think that's a pretty clear, that no longer the American president is. And I don't think even if Biden gets in, which is looking the likely scenario, whilst not guaranteed at the moment, I don't think he's necessarily going to get that back, like in a heartbeat. So I don't know about the global situation. I mean, obviously they used to say when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. It's more like when they sneeze now, the world catches COVID. But it was a cold. But that hypocrisy, like I'm addicted to American politics. I wake up and the first thing I do is I fire this thing up and I'm seeing if what Trump's done and that kind of stuff, and then go to bed and I check it and I'm just on it all the time. But when the Amy Coney Barrett nomination came up, I went, if I was living in America right now, I'd be done with politics. Like not just that hypocrisy of having the pussy grabbing family support group, but people saying literally, use my words against me. We will not nominate a Supreme Court in the last year of a Republican president. Even her saying when they were going to replace Scalia, that you don't replace a judge, ACB, whatever her name is, Barrett, said you don't replace a sitting judge with someone of the opposing view. And then she replaced a sitting judge from the opposing view. Like if I was in America, I'd probably find it very hard to still be involved because that felt like death to me. But then then they've won.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was in America and I was jumping out of it right now, then actually those voices have won and they've done maybe what they're trying to do, which is suppress conversation and votes and dissent.
But then I think of people like, Julianne Genter, my former colleague. She left under the term of George W. Bush because she saw what was happening with the forever wars there, and that was her leaving point where she came down to Aotearoa. I mean, it's sad what's happening over there. And I don't know how they're going to get out of it. Well,
the problem is now, I mean, they need some constitutional amendments. One of the things they need to do is they need to get rid of the collegiate vote. They need to just go straight to a national vote. But the problem is you have to get 75% of the Senate and 75% of the House to agree. And then I think 3/4 of the states have to agree to make a constitutional amendment. In this current climate, even if the Dems take control of the Senate, which is looking on the cards as well, and then if Biden wins, they've got all three, houses, so to speak. You're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to get that. So unfortunately, I think you might be right that there's no way they can change it, because that's what they need to do. Because if they went to a like the national vote, the popular vote only, then actually you could have a debate between three presidents. You could have a debate between three different views, or four. You could have your Tea Party person in there, God save us. You could have your GOP person in there. You could have your Democrat in there, or you could have your progressive Bernie in there as well, all putting themselves forward, and the one that wins the popular vote is the president. Pretty easy.
Yeah.
Well, when I say easy, you know what I mean.
But their political institutions are just so rigid that the risk is they break before they adapt. And that's the benefit of New Zealand, is we can be flexible, we can be agile, and I think we should embrace it more, and that could be our global advantage. But the problem with America is, of course, you've got such a polarized, biased media. And then I remember this is one of the other reasons why I'm leaving politics, is the social media environment. I think is pretty toxic and is unhelped. It's been unhelpful for political discourse. So I remember when Russell was the co-leader, and early on, like 10 years ago, we were talking about how powerful this new tool was going to be to open up democracy, and as politicians and political idea sharers, we could reach people without the gatekeeper of the media. We've got a much more powerful gatekeeper in the social media platforms. So that's playing a whole new element to this, unfolding of the great drama of what's happening in America.
Go from the CEO of TVNZ to Mark Zuckerberg being the overlord now.
Yeah, and people are in their bubbles, they're not talking, they're not seeing diverse perspectives.
Although that is changing a little bit. I know there's research that shows at the last election in America that, the quote-unquote liberal journalists followed liberal journalists, and the conservative journalists followed conservative. But apparently the research shows now there's a lot more cross-pollination of at least those people. So the liberal journalists are following everybody, and the conservative journalists are following everybody. So that's changing slightly. But when you've got these dark overlords, the Jack Dorseys of the world as well, making rules for what can and can't be deemed offensive, and what should and shouldn't go out there, and who should and shouldn't be allowed on there. I mean, like, it's even, not to say that I obviously support his views, but, the banning of the people like Alex Jones, but then the allowing to live on, various other hate groups and, racially motivated voter hate groups and that kind of stuff. It's just, there doesn't seem to be. It seems to me the only way you could do it is to have an all or nothing. Because if there is somebody who is putting in restrictions, then I don't think it's possible to have to quote a Fox News saying, a fair and balanced way to look at that, because we all have bias.
Yep.
And I mean, look what's happening with Joe Rogan at the moment, moving to Spotify. There's a revolt that a whole bunch of people working at Spotify want to censor what he's doing. Now, whether you agree or disagree with that, that's not what he was brought on for. He was brought on because he's the biggest podcast in the world. But there's dissent within Spotify from various groups not wanting him to be able to do what he's been brought on to do. So as soon as you have an opinion, right or wrong, you have conflict. And so that's the problem. So it seems that it should either be all or nothing, but that's terrifying to think about the all. The nothing feels a bit safer because you can manage the nothing, but the all feels terrifying.
Well, it's always going to be balanced, right? And, once upon a time in New Zealand, if you wanted to do a radio station, you had to sail off the coast because the government wouldn't give you a license or even let you operate. Versus, to what was it, Sacha Baron Cohen saying that if Hitler was around today, Facebook would be giving him a platform to share his content. It's about finding that balance. And look, I don't know what the answer is, right? But I think there are fundamental principles you can go back to, which guides where you're likely to go. And I think that's about democracy. It's about greater participation. It's about community values that people can ascribe to. It's not rocket science. And basically, we've let people who have a profit motive be the arbiter. I think we should be letting the public be the arbiter instead.
How do you do that, though?
Well, I mean, I believe we should be reducing our democratic levels. What I mean by that is, in New Zealand, we're one of the most centralised countries in the world. We're lucky that our politics is small and intimate. But, we've got one of the most centralised systems in the world. Our local body politicians have very little power, very little money. In America, a Congress person, represents millions and millions of people. I think we should be taking democratic structures down closer to the community. So kind of once upon a time in New Zealand, so politics was a lot more local. It
makes it sound like, America talks about, the states will make that decision. Are you talking about more like the region will make that decision for whatever the decision type thing is? And then how would that work? Let's use an example. Not that we can solve this necessarily, but if we're taking it down to those levels, are you suggesting down to and including things like, let's say, the cannabis referendum? If Otago Council deems it legal that we're allowed to do here, they can have shops there, even if Canterbury Council says you can't, that sort of thing? Is that what you'd like to say?
Yeah, I mean, we do it with liquor licensing, right?
Yep.
Every region's got its own, policies, and I think it's a good example, actually, that we could be doing it. But I guess what I'm trying to touch on is this problem that a lot of people, their only democratic engagement is voting once every 3 years.
Yeah, right.
For something very abstract and high level. I'd love to encourage more of it. And it's everything from, participatory budgeting, which happens in other cities and other states, through to, citizen councils to advise politicians. We sort of treat democracy as this all or nothing thing where you just vote once every 3 years. I think if we had more participation, I mean, why can't people be grappling with some of those decisions? We do it in the court, in the legal system with juries. We should be involving the public a lot more. And I genuinely believe in the decency of humans. All the psychological evidence shows that actually we're good people, we work together, we're collaborative, yet we don't take up these benefits of who we are as a human. In fact, we put the profit motive above all, or political power above all, and we're seeing the consequences.
I'm so torn with what you've just said, because I like the idea of, let's say my tax dollars, like what I hear you saying is central government is here, local body government is here, I'm here. Not that it's a hierarchy, but this is how far away I am. I'm a lot further away from Wellington and level 9, the ninth floor, than I am from the Mayor's Chamber in Dunedin, as an example. So I quite like that idea that I'm only this close to the decision making for my region. It's quite a nice thing. But when you say, you innately believe in the kind of goodness of people, we've just been talking about people like ones in America who are the utmost hypocrites to feather in their own pockets and lining up against gerrymandering. I saw a clip yesterday from a person who was responsible for making the boundaries for this thing, and he said, I think he actually said this out loud, I think Republicans, I'd find the clip if I can, I think Republicans do this line better, so I've actually adjusted the boundaries to give Republicans the best chance of winning. He said that out loud, right? That was something that was just blatantly said. Yep. When you say you believe in the goodness of people, I don't see that. You seem to be more of an optimist than I on lots of these issues.
I am an optimist.
Look at the Dunedin News Facebook page at the moment if you want to get a cry, and that front page of the ODT right now.
But I mean, America's a much worse example than New Zealand. But even in New Zealand, right, the systems are set up and they prioritise and elevate the voice of corporate interests, of profit, of those who have power in society, and actively marginalise and disenfranchise those without power in society. And of course, we're seeing the consequences, and I think America's a classic example.
Yeah.
And particularly when you've got a winner-takes-all, once every 2, 3, 4 years system, everyone's trying to game it for their benefit. If we had more democracy embedded all throughout the tiers of our society, kind of like we happened once upon a time in different countries, like Greece, I think we'd see the wisdom of the crowds, the better angels of our nature come to the fore, and instead we're prioritising the worst.
Do you think within the New Zealand context, because I do like that idea, right? I like the idea of bringing it closer to the people, like we'll just explain that levels. But do you think that if some kind of system like that was set up in New Zealand would be a danger of all the resources going into Auckland? Because obviously 1.5 million people out of 5, there's obviously, proportionally speaking, there's the most money and there's the most tax and there's the most road user charges and all that kind of stuff going into that environment, and some of the smaller areas, I'm not even talking about Dunedin necessarily, but rural New Zealand missing out quite heavily? Yeah,
possibly. I'm sure you could design a system like it without that. I mean, it's happening already at the moment, but after Ireland, of all the 40 OECD developed countries, we've got the most centralised political system in the entire developed world. So 90% of all tax revenue goes to the government, which they disperse as they see fit.
Yeah.
Local governments only have about 10%. So we're not even seeing the spending allocated to population or where the economic activity is happening at the moment already. So, but I know, coming from a small provincial town of Gisborne, that often what's the decision made in Wellington isn't right for what's happening in Gisborne. So I think having the decision makers closer to where the affected parties are, or embedded in those communities even better, I think you're going to see better decisions. And we're a small country, we can't afford to just waste resources, which we do.
And obviously from a green point of view, that involves heavily the natural resources as well. I mean, we should be the one thing I was thinking about this COVID crisis that we've faced this year is that obviously because New Zealand has such a, well, our GDP is so dependent on things like tourism, but we're also like a little island that could, well, group of islands that could so easily be self-sufficient and self-sustainable. And if we come out of the back of that with some more of, more efficiency in how we live off the stuff we produce, rather than Fonterra exporting most of it, providing for us and then as well, but still obviously businesses making money, that might be a nice outcome. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to see how we're sort of the envy of the world at the moment, and that people want to get in here because of COVID. And I think it's probably pretty fair to say, even with a vaccine, this is going on for another 12 months because there's got to get the vaccine around and that as well. So we've talked a bit about the not the happy outcomes from COVID, because it's a disgusting, horrible thing, but the byproducts, the beneficial byproducts that have come from it.
Well, for decades, right? Politicians have talked about the brain drain. Now we're seeing this brain gain as all these people come back. I think of my sister, who's just arrived back in quarantine from the Netherlands, where she's been living for the last 6 years. She's in a quarantine hotel at the moment. They've decided they've made their lives in Europe. They're a medical researcher and university worker. Now they're going to start their lives back in New Zealand, and there's countless stories of that, it's a great opportunity for New Zealand to really do some cool new stuff. But these people aren't moving back because we had a tourism or a dairy industry.
Yeah.
They were unsustainable before COVID, and I hope we take the opportunity to reorientate away from them.
Your sister as an example, because I often think about, even though it's anecdotal, right, it's still representative of a number of people, however that may be. It may not be the majority, it may not be, who knows. Their move back here is obviously around the COVID situation, but is it a permanent move? Is it like coming back to New Zealand to live now, or is it basing myself there for a while, we'll reassess in a couple of years?
I suspect it's probably the latter. They're going to reassess, but this is the challenge and the opportunity for New Zealand to build we could be paradise, the best country in the world, and people can, I've been doing a little bit of work with the Global Climate website since Parliament rose. It's great. I, down here, can be working with and collaborating with people all around the world on amazing projects. So, but I live on this amazing lifestyle. We can be the envy of the world. So I just hope we build a great country. These people do want to stay, but keep working collaboratively. When you look at New Zealand's past, though, we have been quite, I'm talking pre-internet, we were quite conservative, quite isolationist. I'm too young to remember it, but shit, once upon a time we had 76 countries boycott the Olympics because of New Zealand's racist policies. It's not this vision of what I think of New Zealand today. And so, we've got the opportunity to be what Ronald Reagan talked about, the shining city on the hill, this great bastion of progressive politics and a great life for people down here in the bottom of the Pacific.
The problem with that, and I don't disagree with you, it makes me kind of go yes as well, but the problem with what you've just said, especially the last bit, the bastion of progressive politics, that term, comes with an association to lots of things that I don't think the country's going to get behind yet. Not because they should or shouldn't, but because there is a demographic swing at the moment. I mean, if that takes 20 years to get there, maybe so. But it'll be interesting. I was going to ask as well, the internet on the island, like Dunedin was the first place to have, readily available gig speed to houses. Is it good on the island? Is it like full gig speed, or are you broadbanding it or what?
We've got broadband, but it's not full gig speed, and it's a bit patchy. I mean, we can still stream movies and the kids play games, but it's not the best.
Right.
But I mean, again, reading this history of the former keeper, the Dougalls, I mean, they had one of the first telephone lines because, he'd see all these boating accidents out in the harbour and they couldn't get in touch with them, so they eventually installed a telephone line. So, it's great that we're connected.
You should definitely get a gig over there. And have you seen, of course, the most important question of the day, have you seen the new Borat film yet?
No, I haven't.
You haven't seen it? Does it interest you? Oh my goodness, it's brilliant. You know what? I was really concerned. Big fan of the original Borat movie. Thought it was a revolutionary piece of celluloid. I nearly said cellulite. And was concerned. Thought, Sacha Baron Cohen, who you mentioned before, wants a paycheck, and so he's gone out and done it. And it's, how can you ever live up to? But I have to say, the first one is still a revolutionary film. It's absolutely groundbreaking. This is not that, but it's still pretty amazing.
Because it was 2006, wasn't it? The original one. I think I saw that recently.
I'm not sure.
Which is just amazing how it feels like yesterday.
Yeah, 14 years ago, he says. He says 14 years ago, so.
But I mean, I'm one of my little pet causes in Parliament has been parody and satire, trying to protect that. And I even wrote a members' bill to do it. It's such a strong way to shine a light on the powerful and actually
Totally.
reveal what's happening in society. And some of his stuff's really crass, which I don't like, but he really does shine a light, and you can really see some of the insights.
Did you hear that? Speaking of satire. That Spitting Image, that great US show, I haven't got it out there, but they wouldn't play Spitting Image in America.
Oh, because it would
it would upset the poor leader. Yeah, there we go. Let's have a look at this. Let's bring this up. What does it say? Spitting Image's producers suggest NBC pulled out of airing. Get out of there. I don't want to subscribe. Oh, I've got an ad blocker. Yep. Because they say that it was going to upset Trump. The show won't air in American TV. So I have said for a very long time as well, I was going to bring up this thing. Did you see Spitting Image do Jacinda?
Yes, I did.
Wasn't that hilarious?
But what a great, for so long people thought about New Zealand as the land of hobbits. We're getting a different brand, which is cool.
Let's show some people this. If they haven't seen it, we'll just show a little bit of it. So for people who don't know, Spitting Image is, gosh, it's an institution in the UK, isn't it? And they recently did a puppet, which is what they do. They work in puppets. And they did a puppet of Jacinda Ardern about her victory. Well, this is not the video, but we'll show the pictures. That's the imagery of Jacinda Ardern.
As Mary Poppins.
And although it does talk about socialist country and that kind of stuff, which obviously we are not, but it was very, very, very funny. No, the new Borat film, it's very, very good. He uses his daughter, his 15-year-old daughter, which is an actress from Belgium, I think, as a way to get into places that would have seen him. And I'm sure you've seen the news about Rudy Giuliani.
I haven't seen the video. I've seen the news. And
the video, I have to be honest, he could be tucking his pants in. There's no question about that. But he is very handsy.
Yeah.
So to be someone, I don't know, what is he, in his mid-70s or something, to be someone to then go into a bedroom, even if he was tucking his pants in, right? Let's just say that's what he was doing, right? He was doing nothing else inside his pants. To go by yourself into the bedroom of a hotel with what you probably think is a 20-something, blonde reporter from overseas, and to take her mic off for her. And then he sits on the bed, she sits there, and one of the things he does is he puts his hand on her hip. Even that.
Yeah.
So even if he wasn't doing anything with himself and he was just tucking himself in, because I understand that sometimes lying back on your bed and going, oh, as you get older these days, he was too handsy.
Yeah.
In this current climate, what he did, even if that part was innocent, the other stuff he did was just there's just no way.
But there's too many old guys doing stuff like that. I mean, like Louis C.K. thought he could get away with it. Epstein to the most extreme dimension. These entitled people thought they could get away with it, and it's disgusting. And I'm glad times are changing. Yeah.
So I'm surprised more hellfire and brimstone hasn't come down on Giuliani. He's obviously saying it's all fake and he was tucking himself in. But what I haven't heard talked about is take a step back. What about all the other stuff? What about all the hands on knees? What about the hands on hips? What about all that stuff? They shouldn't be it. But no, it's very, very good. And there's obviously a lot more footage as well, because I've seen some of the shorts to it. And some of the shorts to it is not footage that's in the actual movie.
Right.
So actually, the daughter gets into a RNC event where she meets Donald Trump Jr., that was released the other day. That's not in the movie.
Yeah.
There's another footage of a short where she's riding on the roof of the car, because in Kazakhstan, the woman does ride, and that's not in the movie. So there's probably, I would imagine, for the next wee while, a whole bunch of other stuff coming as well.
But what is a week from the election? Maybe he's going to drop a clip a day as we count down.
I don't know. Maybe. What do you think is going to happen there? Have you got an opinion on that?
Oh, I think Biden's probably going to win. I mean, I think that's a good thing. I understand there's been a lot of contingency planning within the White House for a transition, despite what Trump's talking about. So What I'd hope it isn't, though, is a close result, because it seems like the Republicans have lawyered up, and they're going to be contesting a whole bunch of states
and Supreme Courted up as well.
And I forget what state it was, but basically a court ruling yesterday said that mail-in ballots basically have to be sent in 8 days before the election, which is a fundamental change to previous postal voting rules. So I think we're going to see a whole bunch of states and postal voting taken through the courts, and it could be stolen in the courts effectively.
So I wrote a piece, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, which said exactly that. Quite simply, that if Biden doesn't wink, I said wink, I don't know why I said wink then, but if Biden doesn't win on the day and win big on the day, Trump wins. Because if Biden doesn't have a significant lead on the day, then what's going to happen is Trump will take it in the courts.
Did you hear of the wargaming Biden's team were doing, where they're going through different scenarios? And one of the scenarios in a close election was that basically the courts are tied, the media doesn't know how to call it, so basically they turn to the military to be the arbiter of the election result.
Oh God, haven't heard that.
Oh, it was a nightmare. I think, it was New York Times or Washington Post. It was a credible source that they were doing this. But I mean, this is kind of like Soviet end of days sort of stuff. If you're turning to the military for your results, he goes to hospital and we don't know actually his medical state, or if he's in a fit state to even be the president anymore. There are amazing parallels between the end of the Soviet Union and what we're seeing in the US today. And it is scary, because what I don't want to see internationally is this vacuum where the world could see significant pain and suffering.
It's actually, when you talk about that, it gets a little bit scarier. I mean, it's quite nice sitting on this side of the world looking at an observer, but who would fill the vacuum? Nature abhors a vacuum, as they say. You would hope someone like an Angela Merkel or a Germany or that kind of place would, but of course then it's just ripe for a China or a Russia to jump in there and fill the vacuum as well, like we've seen in parts of the South Pacific, with China being some of the countries looking to, rather than New Zealand or Australia sort of thing. So, I think that Biden needs to win big and big on the day, and if he doesn't, then Trump's chances of being re-elected go through the roof, because he's stacked now officially the Supreme Court. They've stacked the next level down of federal courts as well. And even in Congress, even though that Republicans have a lead in congressmen and women, that you only get one vote per state, and because many of the Democratic congressmen and women come from the same states, actually there's more states represented that are Republican than Democrat.
Yep.
And then of course Pence is also the tying vote in the Congress, and it's actually, if you stop and think about it too much, it gets a little bit scary again.
But, again, because I'm the optimist, when you look at the advance vote numbers, they're through the roof, which is wonderful. When you see
50 million.
But when you see the response of New Zealand to the way the government ran COVID, clearly they were rewarding competence and putting public safety over the ridiculous calls to open up the borders. Hopefully Americans are the same, right? They want security and someone to prioritise their life over corporate donors. So if that's the question, I'm sure Americans will do the right thing. But the
problem is, all you got to do is watch any commentator, or not commentators. You were talking about, you didn't use the word jesters, but you were talking about satire before. I often have referenced this clip I saw with Jon Stewart and Al Gore, probably 2008, 2009, before Jon Stewart left the Daily Show. And Jon Stewart was lamenting to Al Gore, why are we the only people saying these things, meaning the Daily Show, that, we're a show that's introduced by puppets making prank calls, and we're the only people who are saying these kinds of things, meaning that the rest of the media, especially the news media, weren't covering them. And Al Gore looked at him really clearly and he said, the only person that could tell the truth without fear of getting their head cut off was the jester to the king.
Yep.
And it's like, so satire is hugely important, and comedy's hugely important in that realm. And I was going to say, you look at people like Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle was like, I knew that Trump was going to win, because one of his stand-up routines on Netflix at the moment, and he talks about the dusty white folk. I live with the dusty white folk, he says, and he goes, when I turned up and saw all the utes he doesn't call them utes, pickup trucks in the car park, I knew that Trump was going to win. But what he says is, he goes, what he couldn't understand is, why are all these poor white people voting for him? because he's not going to be your president. He's going to be my president. I'm rich. And the thing I was going to say is some Americans seem to have the innate ability to vote against their own self-interest. I was watching a clip this morning from there's a internet news channel called VT or something like that, and they were talking to Americans about healthcare, and I have to say they had southern accents, southern drawls in their accent, who all weren't interested in socialised medicine as they call it. And then when it was all explained to these people what happened in the UK with the NHS, and there was no co-pays, and it was $9, like we pay $5 here for our chemist, whatever you call it when you're getting your drugs, and it's £9 in the US, and in America that EpiPen might cost you $600. At the end of it, they still went, but I wouldn't want that. I just don't know. I'd rather have individualism. And it amazes me that they seem to be the most loyal to the ideas that most hurt them. So when you say vote about the COVID response, I'm still not filled with hope necessarily about that.
And that's part of the problem, right? You've got all this advertising and PR and media reinforcing these traditional frames and attitudes for their benefit. And that's why, people like, the two people I'd love to have dinner with is Noam Chomsky, who's luckily still alive, talking about manufacturing consent. And the stuff isn't an accident. It's a predictable outcome that was being worked towards. And the other is Bill Hicks, the comedian who was able to rip in to really expose the truth of what was going on. And, we need more of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how when the news media journalists let us down, you turn to comedians, and as you say, they're the only ones who can tell the king the truth without fear of getting their heads cut off. Because, albeit however good intentions the journalist has, they still need access, and to have access, they need to, on some levels, use kit and glove, so to speak, to not piss off that politician so much that they'll never come back.
And to go full circle back to our original conversation, that's the challenge for the Greens, right? Working with Labour, and the risk is if you're too close without power, to keep the gains you do get, you don't want to annoy them or frustrate them or call them out, versus the true independence where you can call them out for not doing the things they should be doing or once upon a time promised they would do. So that's the tension for the Greens.
Well, I guess saying that, coming full circle, this would be a good time to say thanks for coming in.
Oh, it's been great.
Have you you're over in I think it's funny you call it the mainland. Is that what you guys reference?
Yeah, we do call it the mainland.
Yep. So you live on the island and you come to the mainland, and you're over here a fair bit. The kids are going to school, you said, over here as well?
Yeah, so we drop them off in the boat and then they push Scooter to school. So today's the only day we actually come into town.
Right.
Because we drop our kid off at the intermediate school to do his tech studies. But
so the intermediate, is that close enough? So it's close to a wharf, their intermediate school?
No, so we've got to drive across the peninsula and to Dunedin North Intermediate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so just around the corner.
Yeah, just doing technology there.
So, I gotcha. So you've got a vehicle at the at the wharf.
Yeah.
Do you have a vehicle at each wharf?
No, that'd be nice. Previous keepers used to bike everywhere and they were super fit, so maybe I should try that.
Electric bike.
Electric bike. There you go. So we just keep our car there, and we drive into town once a week, and it's kind of strange. We put everything in banana boxes because we've got a 2 meter tide difference. So if you're on the wrong side of the tide, it's really difficult getting the stuff up there. So all of our shopping comes in banana boxes. All of our recycling goes off in banana boxes. Have
you tried any sort of grocery deliveries yet, just to see what they do?
Nah, not yet actually.
We keep
meaning to. Yeah.
Like so, you want free delivery in Dunedin? Oh, okay. Well, we're just over the.
You got a vote?
Yeah, you got a vote. Hey Gareth, it's been a pleasure. It's lovely to have you in Dunedin, in and around. We probably talk more politics than we needed to today, but I don't know. Maybe we'll catch up again soon.
I'm still phasing out, and I've got my political fix for the day. So
yeah. There you go. I'm
but
glad
I
for
love
that.
this region. We thought we were only coming down here for 6 months, but what I've noticed is the nature is spectacular and it's all around us. But people smile at you when you walk down the street.
Right.
That's something that doesn't happen in a lot of other cities in New Zealand. So.
How do they recognise you with the beard? Because
I've had a beard for half my career, so I still get recognised sometimes.
Any desire to, obviously maybe not now because you're just out of it, but to get into local body?
It's a bit soon, I think. I've been an activist and a campaigner and a politician my whole life, so I've really bought into this idea of serving and trying to make the world a better place. And you do that in heaps of different forms, and I'm doing it on my island, like literally in my gumboots rather than my suit at the moment. So
Very
it's
good.
a nice place to be.
Well, we better let you get back to it. We don't want the predators to swim across there and get in there. So Gareth Hughes, former MP. What's your title now?
Well, my wife's the keeper. I'm unemployed, so I call myself a kept man.
Kept man. Gareth Hughes, kept man. Thanks for coming in today, and we'll talk again soon.
Cheers, mate.